The story begins in complete darkness. Before there is a birthright to steal, before there is a blessing to lose, and before a single bowl, Jacob is the patriarch, the spiritual heir, the man chosen by God to carry the promise of Abraham. Esau is the cautionary tale. He has just realized that his own mother and brother conspired in the dark to erase his future, and his father is powerless to fix it. Esau collapses into a desperate plea. Have you not reserved a blessing for me? Bless me. Even me also. O my father. He lifts up his voice and begins to openly weep. Isaac has nothing left to give but a haunting anti-blessing. He tells Esau that his dwelling will be away from the richness of the earth. He will survive by his sword, and he will serve his younger brother. It is a sentence of permanent secondary status. The betrayal is total. The family fracture is absolute. In the darkness of that realization, Esau's profound grief curdles into a cold, hardened hatred. He speaks a terrifying vow into the silence of his own heart. The days of mourning for his father are approaching. Once Isaac is dead and buried, Esau will hunt down his brother, and he will kill him. The threat reaches Rebekah, and the family is immediately torn apart. Jacob is forced to run for his life. He flees toward the east, disappearing into the distance, leaving his older brother behind in the ruins of a stolen future. When Jacob flees into the eastern desert, the biblical camera follows him. We watch Jacob's journey, his marriages, his labor under his manipulative uncle Laban. We are taught to view him as a fundamentally profane man, a fleshly, impulsive brute who cared more about his stomach than his soul, and his desperate wrestling with God. Because the narrative focuses on the chosen patriarch, it is easy to assume that Jacob took all the prosperity and favor with him, leaving his brother to rot in misery. The traditional assumption is that because Esau lost the birthright and the blessing, he was cursed to wander the earth as an impoverished, bitter outcast, suffering under the weight of his fleshly choices. We expect his life to fall apart completely. But the biblical text quietly reveals something astonishing. Instead of wasting his life in a perpetual state of rage, Esau eventually steps out of the toxic, manipulative environment of his father's house. He gathers his wives, his children, his servants, and his livestock, and he relocates to the hill country of Seir, a rugged, mountainous region south of the Dead Sea. This red rock wilderness becomes the territory of Edom. In this harsh landscape, away from the shadows of his mother's favoritism and his brother's schemes, Esau does not wither. He thrives. He builds a massive legacy. He accumulates immense wealth. The text later dedicates an entire chapter, Genesis 36, just to list the chiefs, clans, and kings that descend from him, explicitly noting that Edom possessed a royal lineage long before Israel ever crowned a king. Esau becomes so prosperous that the land can no longer support both his household and the remaining household of his father. A man who casually traded his eternal destiny for a single meal. He is the villain of the story, the rejected brother. Step back and look at the architecture of the story. We have reached the midpoint, and the narrative map has completely flipped. The blessed Jacob has spent the last 20 years in exile, being manipulated, lied to, and cheated by his father-in-law. He has lived in a state of constant anxiety, striving to secure his own wealth through endless schemes and sleepless nights. He is holding the promise of the blessing, but he is exhausted. Meanwhile, the rejected Esau has found exactly what Isaac's anti-blessing promised, a life sustained by his own hands in the open spaces of the earth. But he has found something more. He has found contentment. The stolen blessing did not destroy Esau's life, because Esau learned to build a life without it. He let go of the competition. Esau has moved on. The trauma of the past no longer dictates his present, but Jacob cannot say the same. Jacob is still trapped in the memory of the red stew and the goat skins. And now, after 2 decades, God commands Jacob to return to the land of Canaan. The chosen brother is coming home. Despite his massive flocks, his large family, and the explicit promises of God's protection. Jacob is completely paralyzed by fear. He knows he must pass near the territory of Seir. He knows he cannot avoid the brother he cheated, the man the prophet Malachi later points to when he writes the chilling words, "Esau I have hated." It is a simple, effective moral lesson. As Jacob approaches the border of his homeland, he attempts to manage the situation the only way he knows how, by scheming. He sends messengers ahead to Esau's camp, instructing them to address Esau as my lord and Jacob as your servant. He is desperately trying to test the temperature of his brother's wrath. The messengers depart into the desert. Jacob waits in agonizing suspense. When they finally return, they bring Jacob the one sentence he has dreaded his entire life. The messengers return from the wilderness with a single sentence. It is the report Jacob has spent 20 years praying he would never hear. "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him." The biblical text states simply that Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. But the Hebrew words describe a suffocating pace, paralyzing terror. Jacob is caught in a trap. He cannot go backward. And now, a private army is marching toward him from the south. Immediately, Jacob's mind reverts to the only survival mechanism he has ever known. He begins to scheme. First, he divides his entire camp, his wives, his children, his servants, and his flocks into two vulnerable groups. The problem is that the biblical text refuses to keep Esau in that box. If we fast forward through the decades of their lives, his logic is cold and calculating. If Esau attacks and slaughters the first camp, perhaps the second camp can escape in the chaos. Next, Jacob attempts to buy his life. He separates a massive portion of his wealth to send as a bribe. He selects 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels with their calves, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. It is an astronomical fortune, but Jacob does not send this gift all at once. He meticulously spaces the herds apart, putting a distance between each drove, and commands his servants to deliver the same rehearsed script to his brother. "They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau." Why does he do this? Wave after wave, herd after herd, Jacob hopes to slowly wear down his brother's wrath before they meet face to face. He says to himself, "I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me." This is the deepest tragedy of Jacob's terror. He assumes that Esau is exactly like Jacob. We eventually reach a reunion in the desert, and the scene completely shatters our categories. When the two brothers finally meet again, Jacob has lived a profoundly transactional life. Everything he possesses was secured through a contract, a trick, or a trade. He bought the birthright with a bowl of stew. He stole the blessing with goatskins. He earned his wives through years of grueling labor. In Jacob's mind, everything has a price. Therefore, he projects his own transactional nature onto his older brother. He believes that Esau is keeping a ledger, that Esau demands payment, and that forgiveness must be purchased. Jacob spends the night frantically moving his family and his remaining possessions across the dark waters of the Jabbok River. Then, he is left entirely alone in the darkness. What follows is the famous, mysterious night where Jacob wrestles with a divine man until daybreak. In his desperation, Jacob clings to his opponent, demanding a blessing. He finally receives one, along with a new name, Israel, but the encounter costs him dearly. The divine wrestler touches Jacob's hip socket, permanently putting it out of joint. The sun rises over the river. The long, terrifying night is finally over. Jacob crosses the water to join his terrified family. He is no longer the clever, fast-moving grasper who fled Canaan 20 years ago. He is an exhausted, broken man, physically limping in the morning light. The chosen Jacob is absolutely terrified. He is cowering in the dirt, sweating in fear, calculating his survival. He has run out of schemes. He has run out of bribes. He has nothing left but his wives, his children, and his own fragile body. He looks up toward the horizon. The dust is already rising into the sky. 400 men are approaching, and Esau is riding at the front. Jacob moves to the front of the line. His hip is dislocated, forcing a slow, agonizing walk in the morning light. He is finally placing his own broken body between the approaching army and his vulnerable family. As the dust settles and Esau draws near, Jacob drops to the earth. He bows down to the ground 7 times. This is not a casual greeting between siblings. In the ancient Near Eastern world, this is the formal, documented posture of a conquered vassal approaching a sovereign king. It is an act of total surrender. Jacob is physically acting out the very blessing he stole 20 years ago, the blessing that said his mother's sons would bow down to him. Jacob expects the sword. He expects the wrath he created to finally fall upon him. But Esau does not draw a weapon. The text says Esau ran to meet him. In the ancient world, wealthy patriarchs and chieftains did not run. It required lifting their heavy robes and exposing their legs, an act considered deeply undignified for a man of authority, and frantically sending waves of bribes to save his own life. He is exhausted from a lifetime of trying to manipulate his way into blessing. We see this same shocking cultural subversion centuries later in Jesus' parable of the prodigal son. When a father hikes up his robes and runs toward his rebellious boy, Esau abandons his dignity entirely. He closes the distance, throws his arms around Jacob, falls on his neck, and kisses him. The silence of the desert is broken by a single sound. They weep, the tears of the stolen blessing. The agonizing cry from Isaac's tent 2 decades earlier are finally replaced by the tears of reconciliation. Esau looks up and sees the women and children bowing in the dirt. He asks who they are, and Jacob introduces his family. Then Esau asks the question Jacob has been dreading. What do you mean by all this company that I met? He is asking about the massive, calculated waves of livestock Jacob sent ahead in the dark. Jacob answers from his deeply transactional worldview. To find favor in the sight of my Lord. Jacob is still trying to buy his survival. He is still trying to purchase the peace he does not deserve. But Esau looks at the younger brother who lied to their father, who stole the family inheritance, who ruined his youth. And he speaks a sentence that shatters Jacob's entire theology. But the rejected Esau runs. He throws his arms around his brother's neck. He refuses the money. He weeps. I have enough. My brother, keep what you have for yourself. Notice the title he uses. He does not call Jacob supplanter or thief. He calls him brother. Esau refuses to be bought because he does not require payment. He has already forgiven him. The man we have been taught to view as a fleshly, profane brute displays a posture of unconditional grace that perfectly prefigures the gospel. Jacob is so stunned by this unearned mercy that he begs Esau to accept the gifts. In Hebrew, Jacob urges Esau to take his barakah, the exact word for blessing. Jacob is desperately trying to give a physical blessing back to the man whose spoken blessing he stole. Jacob looks at Esau and confesses, "For I have seen your face," which is like seeing the face of God. Now that you have received me favorably. Jacob expected the face of a punisher. He found the face of grace. It is a beautiful, peaceful resolution. But this magnificent display of mercy creates a massive theological problem for anyone reading the rest of the Bible. If Esau was this forgiving, if he was this deeply gracious in the end, why does the scripture seem to turn against him? How do we explain the chilling words of the later prophets? The reconciliation in the desert is breathtaking. But it leaves us with a haunting question. If Esau was a man of such profound grace, he looks at the man who ruined his life, stolen his future, and fractured his family. And he says, why does God later declare through the prophet Malachi, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated? This startling phrase is later quoted by the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Romans. For centuries, it has been used to argue that God harbored a deep, emotional malice toward Esau before the boys were even born. It feels like a devastating contradiction. How can the villain of our theological textbooks be the hero of the actual biblical scene? To resolve this, we have to recognize that the later prophets are speaking on a massive national scale. We must separate Esau, the individual man, from Edom, the future nation. The man, Esau, embraced his brother, wept on his neck, refused the bribes, and went his way in peace. But hundreds of years later, his descendants, the nation of Edom, did not maintain that grace. When the brutal armies of Babylon eventually besieged Jerusalem, the Edomites did not help their brothers. They stood by and watched. The prophet Obadiah records that Edom actually cheered the destruction of Israel, looted their burning cities, and stood at the crossroads to hand Jewish refugees over to their executioners. Of soup is ever cooked. There is a war. 2 unborn boys are violently striking each other in the dark of their mother's womb. I have enough. My brother, keep what you have for yourself. This is the hidden contradiction of Genesis. When Malachi writes his prophecy, he is looking back at the violent, multi-generational betrayal of a nation, not the individual heart of the man in Genesis 33. But what about the specific words love and hate? In our modern vocabulary, these are strictly emotional terms of affection and disgust. But in ancient Near Eastern royal and covenantal language, they carried a different positional weight. They were legal idioms of selection. To love meant to choose someone for a primary inheritance or a specific historical purpose. To hate meant to simply not select them for that role. We see this idiom clearly elsewhere in Scripture. Genesis tells us that Jacob hated his first wife, Leah, which practically meant he favored and chose Rachel. Jesus himself tells his disciples they must hate their father and mother to follow him, using the exact same ancient idiom of ultimate priority, not emotional malice. God is declaring his sovereign choice. He chose the lineage of Jacob to carry the covenant, to steward the law, and ultimately, to bring the Messiah into the world. He did not choose the lineage of Esau for that specific redemptive task. But not being chosen to carry the messianic line does not mean Esau the man was banned from the grace of God. God's covenantal choice of Jacob did not require Esau to be a miserable, godless wretch. The biblical text allows Esau to be exactly what we see. If Esau is truly nothing more than a wicked, flesh-driven villain, why does he offer a level of unconditional forgiveness that perfectly mirrors the gospel? In the dust of the desert, a man who lost his earthly birthright, but who still learned how to forgive, how to build a life, and how to reflect the very heart of God in his mercy. The theological tension is resolved. The ancient history is settled. But what does this mean for the reader who is standing in Jacob's shoes today? We must step out of the ancient desert, leave the history behind, and look closely at what we are currently holding in our own hands. Step back and look at the entire journey. We began in the violent darkness of a womb and ended in the bright, sweeping dust of the desert. We trace the path of a man who traded his legal inheritance for a bowl of red stew, whose father's spoken blessing was stolen through a sensory illusion, and who screamed in absolute agony when he realized his future had been completely erased. Yet, decades later, this same man stepped out of the wilderness of Edom, not with a sword of vengeance, but with open arms. The profound paradox of this biblical portrait is that the man chosen to carry the covenant, Jacob, spent his entire life exhausted. He was always scheming, always negotiating, always looking over his shoulder. He bought, he stole, he fled, and he fought. What if the brother we were taught to pity actually understood grace far better than the brother who was chosen, until he was left alone and limping in the dark? But Esau, the brother left behind, the brother stripped of his rights, discovered the secret that Jacob could never quite master. He learned how to stop grasping. Notice the transformation of the tears. When we first saw Esau weep, it was the tidza'akah, the horrific, gut-wrenching cry of a victim whose life had been shattered by family betrayal. Those were the tears of a stolen destiny, falling onto the floor of a blind father's tent. But when he finally holds his brother decades later, the tears return with a completely new meaning. They are no longer tears of trauma. They are the tears of overwhelming, unconditional grace. The bitter weeping of the stolen blessing is finally healed by the weeping of the desert embrace. At long last, the two boys are no longer fighting in the dark. The struggle is over. And this is where the ancient history becomes a mirror. When we read this story, we naturally want to identify with the chosen brother. But if we are honest, many of us are carrying the exact same exhaustion as Jacob. What are you currently trying to control? What future are you frantically trying to secure through your own schemes, negotiations, and endless striving? How much of your life is spent sending out metaphorical bribes, trying to manage how people perceive you, trying to secure your position? This is not ultimately a story about a wicked brother and a righteous brother. It is a story about the absolute exhaustion of grasping for control, terrified that if you stop managing the outcomes, you will lose everything. What have you mistaken for faith, when it is actually just a desperate attempt to control your own life? We live like Jacob, exhausted by our own cleverness, limping through our days because we cannot simply trust God to provide. We are terrified of what happens if we let go of the heel. But Esau stands in the desert and offers the very freedom we are starving for. He looks at his broken, scheming brother and simply says, "I have enough. You do not have to fight for what God has already decided to give you, and you do not have to exact revenge on the people who have wounded you. You can lay down the ledger. You can let go of the control. You can stop the endless wrestling in the dark, and finally rest in the morning light." If this study helped you see the book of Genesis with fresh eyes, please consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who might be exhausted from their own striving. Leave a comment below with the biblical story you would like to explore next, and the shocking beauty of letting go. It is a story framed entirely by tears, the bitter, heartbroken weeping of a young man whose future is stolen, and the tears of overwhelming grace when an old man embraces his enemy in the dust of the desert. But to understand how Esau reached that desert, and how he found a peace that Jacob could never seem to grasp, we cannot start at the reconciliation. We have to go back to the moment the fracture became permanent. We have to look at the hunger that started it all. Section 2, the red stew and the appetite. The smell of boiling lentils hits him before he even reaches the edge of the camp. Esau is a man of the open wilderness. He is accustomed to the brutal heat of the sun, the grit of the chase. They are fighting for supremacy before they have even opened their eyes or drawn a breath of ancient air, and the physical exhaustion of tracking game through unforgiving terrain. But on this particular day, the text tells us he comes in from the field faint. He is completely depleted. The Hebrew phrasing paints a picture of a man running entirely on empty, desperate for physical relief. He finds his younger brother, Jacob, calmly cooking over a fire. The contrast is immediately visible. Jacob is the quiet man, the one who dwells in tents, carefully observing the rhythms of the household. He has been waiting for an opportunity. Esau looks at the boiling pot and demands, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." The English translation softens the demand. In Hebrew, the phrasing captures a coarse, almost animalistic urgency. Esau essentially says, "Let me gulp down some of that red stuff." He does not even name the food. He is so consumed by his appetite that he only sees its color. Jacob does not offer his starving brother a bowl. He offers him a contract. "Sell me your birthright now." To understand the sheer audacity of this moment, we must understand what Jacob is actually buying. Modern readers often assume the birthright was a purely spiritual concept. The physical struggle is so severe that Rebecca cries out in agony, asking God why she is even alive to experience such tearing from the inside, a guaranteed ticket to heaven. But in the ancient Near East, the birthright, the Bakura, was a highly specific legal and economic status. Archaeological discoveries, such as the ancient Hurrian texts from Nuzi, reveal how seriously these cultures took the rights of the firstborn. The birthright guaranteed a double portion of the father's inheritance. More importantly, it carried the weight of family leadership. The firstborn became the patriarch, the judge, and the priest of the household after the father died. It was a position of immense authority, but it required carrying the heavy responsibility of the family's future. Esau, however, is not thinking about responsibility. He is trapped entirely in the present tense. I am about to die. Esau rationalizes. Of what use is a birthright to me? He is not literally starving to death in his own camp. He is simply exaggerating his immediate discomfort to justify a catastrophic decision. His appetite has eclipsed his vision. He looks at the legal authority of his family, the double inheritance, the responsibility of leadership, and he decides that a bowl of warm, red lentils is worth more. He swears the oath. The divine answer she receives sets the trajectory for the rest of the book of Genesis. Two distinct nations are warring in her womb. The trade is made. Jacob hands over the bread and the stew. Esau eats, drinks, rises, and walks away. The biblical writer records his verdict in one devastating sentence. Thus, Esau despised his birthright. He treated a sacred responsibility as if it were worthless. The tragedy of this moment is literally etched into Esau's name. Because of his obsession with the red stew, the text notes that he becomes known as Edom, a name derived from the Hebrew word for red. He traded his identity as the leader of the family for the color of his immediate craving. He let a temporary physical sensation dictate his permanent reality. Jacob has done it. He now holds the legal right to the double portion. He has successfully bought the future, supplanting his brother just as his name predicted. But in the ancient world, a legal transaction was only half of the equation. The birthright dictated the division of property. But there was something even more powerful than the birthright. There was a final, irreversible transfer of authority that could not be bought, bargained for, or written on a contract. It could only be spoken by the father. The birthright was gone, but the father's spoken blessing still remained, and the older will ultimately serve the younger. When the boys are finally pulled into the light, the conflict only hardens. The tent is heavy with age and failing senses. Isaac, the patriarch, is nearly blind and believes he is approaching the end of his life. In the ancient Near East, the spoken blessing of a dying patriarch was not a sentimental prayer. It was an oral will and testament, carrying both legal permanence and divine prophetic weight. Once the words left the father's mouth, they could not be retracted or unsaid. Isaac calls for his favorite son, Esau. He asks for one final meal of wild game, promising to pass on the blessing of Abraham before he dies. Esau immediately takes his bow and walks out into the open field. But Rebekah has been listening. What follows is one of the most elaborate and deeply unsettling deceptions in biblical history. Rebekah commands Jacob to bring 2 young goats, cooks them to mimic the taste of wild game, and instructs Jacob to present himself to his blind father as Esau. Jacob's only objection to this conspiracy is not moral, but practical. He points out a physical reality. Esau is a hairy man, and he is smooth. If Isaac touches him, he will feel the lie and pronounce a curse instead of a blessing. To solve this, Rebekah covers Jacob's hands and the smooth part of his neck with the skins of the slaughtered goats. Finally, she dresses Jacob in Esau's finest garments, clothes that carry the distinct scent of the outdoors. The firstborn arrives red and covered in thick hair, looking more like an animal than a human infant. They name him Esau. When Jacob steps into his father's dark room, he is weaponizing human senses to exploit an old man's vulnerability. Isaac is immediately suspicious. The timing is simply too fast. He asks, "How is it that you have found it so quickly?" "My son," Jacob responds with a chilling lie that brings God himself into the deception. "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Still unsure, Isaac asks his son to come close. The scene is physically agonizing. The blind father reaches out his hands in the dark, feeling the rough, dead goat hair on Jacob's arms. Desperately trying to read the body of his son, the senses begin to war against each other. Isaac mutters the famous contradiction. The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He leans in for a final test, asking Jacob to kiss him. As Jacob leans close, Isaac smells the garments. The scent of dirt, wind, and wild places fills the confined room. The smell of his beloved hunter. The sensory illusion is complete. Isaac eats the meat. He drinks the wine. And then, he releases the words of power. He pronounces the irrevocable blessing over the man kneeling before him. He gives away the dew of heaven, the fatness of the earth, and an abundance of grain and wine. But the most devastating line of the blessing is the one concerning the family hierarchy. His brother follows seconds later. His small, desperate hand already wrapped tightly around Esau's heel. The grasper, the supplanter. Jacob, be lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Jacob has not simply taken a blessing. He has completely stolen his brother's identity to manipulate his father. And in doing so, he has seized the future that Esau thought was still his. The theft is complete. The words have been spoken. Jacob quietly gathers himself and walks out of his father's presence, carrying the stolen destiny of a nation. But the deception hangs by a fragile thread. Jacob barely escapes. The door to the tent has only just closed, and the smell of the false hunter still lingers in the room. When the true firstborn steps inside, the moment Esau steps into the tent, the air changes. He is carrying the steaming meat he has just hunted and prepared. He speaks with joyful anticipation, ready to receive the culmination of his identity as the firstborn. Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me. The text tells us that Isaac begins to tremble violently. The Hebrew conveys a physical shaking, a sudden, terrifying panic that seizes the old man's body. He stammers out the realization, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him." And then, recognizing the unalterable nature of the spoken word. For thousands of years, readers have looked at these two brothers and confidently sorted them into clean theological boxes. Isaac adds the devastating finality, "Yes, and he shall be blessed." When Esau hears these words, the facade of the rugged, self-sufficient outdoorsman shatters completely. Genesis 27-34 records his reaction. He cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry. To the modern ear, this can sound like a frustrated shout. It is easy to picture Esau throwing a childish tantrum because he was outsmarted. But the English translation obscures the sheer horror of this moment. We need to look at the Hebrew word used for Esau's cry, tza'akah. In basic terms, it means an outcry or a shriek. The English word cry often implies standard weeping or a raised voice. But in the ancient Hebrew mind, a tza'akah is not a normal expression of sadness. It is a visceral, gut-wrenching scream of absolute agony. It is the sound of a human being tearing from the inside out. If we trace this word through the rest of the biblical narrative, its weight becomes unmistakable. This is the exact word used to describe the horrific wailing of the Egyptians on the night of the Passover, when their firstborn sons are found dead. It is the word used for the agonizing groaning of the Israelite slaves suffering under the whips of Pharaoh. It is the outcry of the oppressed, the violated, and the dying. When we understand this, the scene completely changes. Esau is not a cartoon villain losing a game. He is a victim of devastating family trauma.